So this video lecture is about the two selections from Charles Darwin I asked you guys to read for this week. So that would be this excerpt from Chapter 3 of The Origin of Species entitled Struggle for Existence, and this selection from The Descent of Man entitled Natural Selection and Sexual Selection. Darwin was probably the most important, or at least perceived to be the most important scientist of the Victorian era. He was definitely the preeminent naturalist. And one of the things that Darwin does that's really, he gives us the theory of evolution, and this is important. But the thing that Darwin does that's really crucial for science is he regularizes science. So Darwin's scientific technique is to observe natural phenomenon, observe a wide variety of natural phenomenon, and attempt to draw conclusions based on his observations. And this becomes the foundation of much modern science, is this idea that we can understand the world around us through observations and through interpretation of the natural phenomenon that we observe. And Darwin really makes this sort of the main scientific technique. So we have here a couple of his most important specific ideas, many of which continue actually to be ill understood today, because we sort of translate them into popular language, popular ideas, and then get them wrong. So, for instance, this theory of the struggle for existence, this idea of the survival of the fittest, is something that we often misuse or misunderstand when sort of popularly talking about it, because what Darwin is talking about here is an incredibly complex series of processes within a community. And we often, I think, talk about the survival of the fittest as sort of one creature is dominant, one person is dominant, whatever it is. And so when we talk about this as sort of a social metaphor or an economic metaphor or things like this, we're often sort of saying you have to be ruthless and you have to really go for what you want and things like this. And that's not what Darwin is saying. That's not what the struggle for existence means. The struggle for existence for Darwin is located within ecosystems rather than sort of eco-individualism or eco-organisms. This is a sort of complex coexistence. And he says this here at the top of 1562. He says, "I use this term," that's the struggle for existence, "in a large and metaphorical sense, including dependence of one being on another, and including, which is more important, not only the life of the individual." So this is the idea here, is that survival of the fittest, the struggle for existence, is about working together, working within a community, and working within an ecosystem, that is a system with a set of components, a set of elements, for mutual survival. So this is not, I'm going to get mine, I'm out for myself kind of situation. This is about understanding organisms within the context of other organisms and sort of working together. And he says this, he's got this section on 1563, where he's talking about the dependence of different kinds of species on one another. And ultimately he comes to this conclusion. So he's talking largely about flowers initially. And he says, "Hence we may infer as highly probable that, if the whole genus of humblebees became extinct or very rare in England, the heartsease and red clover would become very rare or wholly disappear." And actually one of the big sort of scientific crises right now is that massive amounts of bees are dying out, and it's almost certainly going to have a major effect on ecosystems. And we get Darwin saying it here in the mid-Victorian period. But he goes beyond this. This is not just bees and flowers. Rather, we've got mice who destroy bees' nests, and then cats who destroy mice. So, he says at the bottom of this paragraph on 1563, hence, it is quite certain, or it is quite credible, that the presence of a feline animal in large numbers in a district may determine, through the intervention first of mice and then of bees, the frequency of certain flowers in that district. So this is a system. This is not a case where sort of individuals are sort of the primary component here, or where sort of personal acquirement of resources is paramount. Although personal requirement of resources for Darwin is important, what matters here is ultimately that we understand nature, existence, and our experience within ecosystems as systems. So when you kill the cats in the neighborhood, by extension, that affects the flower population. And this is the way that things work, according to Darwin. So the other sort of big component of Darwin's theory is evolution. And this is what he's most known for, and this is what he is most sort of important for, perhaps, in sort of scientific history, which I don't know a tremendous amount about. But he says here, 1569, this is really sort of the thesis of the natural and sexual selection idea, is that the main conclusion arrived at in this work, and now held by many naturalists who are well competent to form a sound judgment, is that man is descended from some less highly organized form. So he gives us some evidence of the fact that humanity has derived from lower forms of life. Lower forms of life is now a problematic term in the sciences, but this is the way that the Victorians thought of it. So 1570, this sort of central lengthy paragraph here, he gives us this sense that humans have evolved from a sort of advanced primate or ape, who's evolved from a basic monkey, who's evolved from some sort of unknown marsupial, who's evolved from a sort of reptile or amphibian, who evolved from some sort of aquatic animal with no gender skeletal system, and with sort of without fully developed organ systems, brain, heart, lungs, whatever it is. And then we can go sort of farther back than that now, because we sort of know more about sort of early biology than Darwin did. And we can talk about how this sort of primeval organism, a sort of jellyfish creature that Darwin imagines, evolves from sort of single-cell organisms and things like this. And so we've got this sort of chain of descent here, what Darwin would call chain of descent. And the reason that this happens, according to Darwin, the reason that we have different species and different evolutionary tracts and things like this, is because specific characteristics are identified as desirable, and these are reproduced through sexual selection. So over hundreds, thousands, billions of generations of creatures, we get different characteristics of them as different traits, whether that's sort of aesthetic traits like the most beautiful plumage, or whether that's survival traits like large teeth, thicker skin, better muscle structure, whatever it is. As these things as creatures that have these particular preferable traits mate more, and creatures without those preferable traits mate less, we have the reproduction of those traits. And Darwin says here, on 1572, basically that all elements of life can be tied to sexual development and selection. He says, he who admits the principle of sexual selection will be led to the remarkable conclusion that the cerebral system not only regulates most of the existing functions of the body, but has indirectly influenced the progressive development of various bodily structures and of certain mental qualities. Courage, pugnacity, perseverance, strength and size of body, weapons of all kinds, musical organs, both vocal and instrumental, bright colors, stripes and marks, and ornamental appendages have all been indirectly gained by the one sex or the other through the influence of love and jealousy, through the appreciation of the beautiful in sound, color, or form, and through the exertion of a choice. And these systems of the mind manifestly depend upon the development of the cerebral system. So in other words, our unconscious desire, the way that we choose mates, in theory at least, leads to the perpetuation or extinction of certain traits. And this is the theory of sexual selection. This is the foundation of the theory of evolution. And it is upon this basis, as Darwin argues, that humanity evolved from the apes, basically. I mean, from a slightly different form of life. I'm going to say different because I think that it's problematic to sort of hierarchize forms of life. And contemporary eco-critics, people who study literature and culture in relation to the environment, I think would probably agree with that point. Darwin is much more willing to sort of hierarchize higher and lower orders of life, but I'm going to say different. But then I think ultimately the sort of interesting endpoint here, the last sentence in this section on natural and sexual selection, is really interesting. This is 1573. Darwin says, man still bears in his bodily frame the indelible stamp of his lowly origin. And I think that's actually a really cool idea because it destabilizes our human egotism, the sort of sense that we have of being the greatest animal, the pinnacle of animals, or this sense that we have of being separate from nature, being separate from other forms of life, that human beings are inherently different and special. This idea that no matter how sophisticated our culture, no matter how well established we are, no matter how many opposable thumbs we grow, we will always have in us, in our physical bodies, the remnants, the echoes of that first single-cell organism to experience life on this planet.